Hello, I'm Ronald Day, Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including from those most impacted by the system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewer, to please spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune Society. So today we're going to be talking about a very important issue in New York City, and that's the Fair Chance Act. And I have with me two dynamic guests. One, Alyssa Aguilera from Vocal New York, and Hannah Elfiky from the Fortune Society. So let me share with our guests a little bit about you. So Alyssa, Political Director, Vocal New York, is a grassroots company organizing group that builds power among low-income people impacted by HIV/AIDS, the drug war, and mass incarceration. At Vocal, Alyssa leads campaigns to reform discriminatory policing practices, create alternatives to the drug war, and address the collateral consequences of mass incarceration. So thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you for having me.
And let me share some information as well about Hannah. So you've been working at the Fortune Society for a little less than a year.
Yes.
Right? As a career advisor in our Employment Services Department.
Correct.
And you're enrolled at John Jay, pursuing a bachelor's degree in psychology?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And you help our clients identify barriers to employment, which can range from housing to lack of education, not having the skill set, and helping them secure a proper attire, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay, great. So let's get into this. We believe it's going to be a dynamic conversation about the Fair Chance Act. So October 27th, the Fair Chance Act became law in New York City, right? A lot of people have no idea, have no inclination what the Fair Chance Act is or what it does. So what I would like to do is to start with you, Alyssa, and say, can you kind of like frame the conversation for us so that our audience will have an understanding of the Fair Chance Act and its implications? All right, we know that it's about providing a fair opportunity for people with criminal records to have access to employment. But can you share some information about it, please?
Sure. So the Fair Chance Act is New York City legislation. So it was passed through the City Council, signed by the mayor. And essentially what it will do is it amends the city's Human Rights Charter. And the Human Rights Charter are the laws and the policies that say, you know, this is discrimination or not.
Yes.
And what it really does is it says that you cannot, it outlines a process for employers for how to consider a criminal record history when they're going through the hiring process. So it does a couple of things. One, it says you cannot ask about criminal record history on job postings, announcements, anything like that. You also can't ask about criminal record history on the application itself. So that's sometimes we say ban the box. So when they're referring to the box, they mean that little box on the application that says check here if you've ever been convicted of a felony, a crime, or whatever. But this law actually goes beyond that as well. It also says you can't ask about conviction histories during an interview. You have to wait till after a conditional job offer of employment. So it's really saying, you know, let people go through the whole process, show their qualifications and their merits, and then we'll consider criminal record history. And so that's what this law does. It went into effect on October 27th. It impacts all employers with 4 or more employees, so it's quite a lot. And yeah, so it's going to have a really big impact in the city. We think it's the strongest, most progressive law in the country for fair chance hiring, and so we want to make sure it's implemented and people actually know about it.
Well, thank you for sharing that context so that our viewing audience has an understanding of the Fair Chance Act and what it's designed to do. So Hannah, let's turn to you now. So again, you work at the Fortune Society, you're in employment services, and you were released from incarceration at some point yourself and felt strongly that you would face discrimination as a job seeker. Can you share your experience with us?
Sure. I'm an individual that got involved with the criminal justice aspect later in my life. So during my incarceration and as I returned home, my fear became employment.
Yes.
My field of work is social work. I love what I do. I'm good at it. And I was afraid that I was going to have to seek something else. I actually came to Fortune Society as a client because of that fear. And while I was there participating in the workshop, they encouraged me to go further and feel that there's no barriers that I can't overcome in terms of that. And that was actually a huge relief for me because I was going to, my associate's degree and everything I was working through was in that field. So I was afraid I was going to have to restart. And at this age, it was pretty impacting on my life.
And so as a career advisor, you work with people on a daily basis. I mean, we have hundreds of clients
Yes.
that are offered services. And so what were the services that you received that we provide on a regular basis to prepare people for these employment opportunities?
Well, first thing is I completed a 2-week job readiness workshop.
Yes.
And that is more geared to conducting yourself appropriately during an interview, what to say, what not to say, how much to say, how much you don't say. And that's crucial during the interview process.
Yes.
When I sat with my career advisor, I was told of the different vocational training programs. I chose to do the transitional work program, which is the part-time paid internship, as a way of getting myself in the doorway and returning back to the work field. And through that, I did my internship actually at Fortune in the Employment Services Department, and I was able to secure employment upon completing it
Yes.
with Fortune Society.
Yeah. And so we know that oftentimes, Alyssa, we send folks out who are prepared, as Hannah was prepared during the job readiness training for an opportunity, and sometimes they're denied the job, and we know that there's a lot of discrimination, there's a lot of stigma associated with the criminal conviction. So what can people do if they feel like they face discrimination? Sometimes it's overt, right? Sometimes it's not. What are the remedies in the Fair Chance Act?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that this law is so great is because it's not just a beautiful bill that has this ideal language and then nothing to hold people accountable. It actually has written into the law that people can bring a private right of action, which means that they can get their own attorney to bring cases against employers that are violating the law, and that includes damages, so people can get some monetary reward for actually bringing forward those cases, and that's a big component to give people incentive to go through an often long process that is probably not that. Especially for people looking for a job, the last thing they want to do is to go through this big legal process and not know. So that's an option. And then also the city's Human Rights Commission, which you can reach by calling 311 and asking for civil rights, or you can go onto their website. It's actually nyc.gov/fairchancenyc, and you can file a complaint with them. So even if you don't want to go through the whole process, you can give a tip and say, hey, this employer, violated the law. I was asked a question too early, just so we can make sure that employers are actually being held accountable. Sure. And so those are some of the methods that we are, as the bill is getting rolled out, that we want to make sure that we see adequate implementation of the new law.
Sure, thank you. So one of the things that has come up is we know that a lot of discrimination is not just associated with the conviction, but the majority of people who are incarcerated in New York City are minorities, right? And there has been some research that has said that a white person without a criminal record is more likely to receive a call back or an interview than an African American without a criminal record. So we know that there's some conscious and unconscious bias regarding race. And so the issue now I'm thinking is, will there be a proxy now for discriminating against people that have criminal records? Sometimes when people apply for jobs, although they're not checking the box now, sometimes you are asked to upload a resume. And let's say a person who served some time in prison, some of them, there might be a gap on a resume. Some people even put on their resume that they were in a correctional facility. So how do you think that's going to potentially play out will there be some discrimination that's a proxy for criminal justice or criminal convictions? Because some employers, at least from experience, we've determined they're kind of like hardened against hiring someone with a criminal record. Even though, if you look at the research, shows if you give a person an opportunity, you can get a really great employee who could be an asset to your company.
Correct.
But you have to be willing to give the person the chance. So do you see that as a potential issue?
Right. I mean, I think that we have to be realistic and acknowledge that, all employment discrimination is not going to go away with the passage of this law. And, as you mentioned, there's lots of other factors that are at play. There's studies that say that if your name sounds too ethnic, that you're less likely to get a job, or a job interview. So there are obviously lots of factors at play. But I think that what's really important about this law and the bigger conversation and the movement that is behind it, that everybody from President Obama to the Koch brothers are talking about this, is it really questions why do we use criminal record history as a way of evaluating people's ability to do a job. It's not good for the economy, it's not good for recidivism, it's not good for communities of color that are impacted by mass incarceration. I think that yes, we want the laws to change and we want people to have concrete improvements in their lives, but we also need to shift the narrative and get people to question why, a criminal record means a permanent sentence of unemployment and not being able to access a decent job.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So Hannah,
Yes.
tell us a little bit more about, so again, we're preparing clients for these gainful employment opportunities, and so when they face this discrimination, and they come back to us, what provisions do we have in place for them to be able to deal with those type of situations?
Well, a lot of our clients do come and they're frustrated. They feel that they are still serving a sentence because they continuously tell me that they have paid their debt to society and yet no one is providing them with that opportunity for employment. So I basically more so evaluate how the interview went, and then of course direct them to the advocacy department that we have for them to continue further and to really see, is it their impression of the fact that they didn't get the job, or is it something really that the employer discriminated on?
Yes. Okay, that's great. And so could we go a little bit more into the weeds? Because, one of the things that came up for me is, okay, so a conditional offer is now the threshold. So a person gets an interview and, if they're a solid candidate, so the employer is supposed to now not evaluate anything about criminal record, right? My understanding is that they're not supposed to do like searches. So can you talk about that? Because we know that some employers take the initiative. They have HR staff that will go online, go to the Department of Corrections website, go to a parole website, and see, okay, we have the person's name, we have the person's information. Is this person on parole? Whatever. Is that a violation as well? Can you speak to that?
So the law clearly states that any inquiry about criminal record history cannot be done until after the conditional offer stage. So any inquiry means, asking about it.
Yes.
It means looking somebody up in, any sort of database, running a criminal background check. All of that stuff is illegal. Obviously, if somebody's at home on their iPad in the middle of the night looking someone up, maybe we aren't going to be able to figure that stuff out. But the law is very clear that that's a violation and cannot be done.
Got it. And what about the very back end? So I interview for a job, you think that I'm a solid candidate, and then you do the criminal background check.
Right.
What happens then? Do I then provide information about my criminal background? I mean, the criminal background check was already done.
Right.
Am I supposed to say, like, fill out an application now or some document that says, I have these convictions, and is it supposed to match up with the background check? Or is the employer supposed to look just to determine if the conviction would act as an impediment in some way, right, to me getting that job? So how will that work?
So So you have a condition, and this is all for people, for jobs and
Yes,
employers
yes,
that
yes.
want to actually run background checks. I would argue there are many jobs that if
That's a
you're
good
going through a
point.
process and hiring people, you interview them, you like them, you know, what's even the point of doing that? So I think that's something we want to raise. Like for some jobs where it's not sensitive in nature, you know, we should be encouraging people. Like I hire people and I never run background checks, and it works out great.
Yes,
So putting that aside, so let's say you're somebody that I find a candidate that I want to hire,
Yes.
but I want to run a background check. I run it, and then there's a real process for how that works. So it's fair and transparent. So it says, okay, I'm gonna, I see your background, and if there's nothing you want to do further, you still want to hire the person, great. You don't have to do anything different. But if you want to take adverse action, so essentially if you want to deny somebody a job, what you need to do is show them the record that you're looking at, because oftentimes, you know, people with common names, or maybe you're arrested for something and not convicted, and you know, rap sheets are kind of confusing to read, and I doubt that all employers are adequately trained on how to read them. So we want to make sure that, you know, the whatever, we're both looking at the same thing, right? So I say, okay, so here's your rap sheet. This is what I saw. This conviction right here is what's giving me pause. It's why I want to rescind the offer. And then they need to actually fill out a form that explains in writing how the job duties are connected to the conviction, right? So we don't want people to run backgrounds and say, oh, you got into a fight 10 years ago and you have an assault charge, and now you're trying to work, you know, in the Container Store or something like that. What does that, you know, what does that have to do with each other? And you have to do what's called, in New York State, we have Article 23A language.
Yes.
So one important thing to know is that it's already been illegal to discriminate based on criminal record history before the Fair Chance Act was passed, except that there was just no process for how to do it. So the Fair Chance Act is really about creating a process. So at that point, you need to explain. So it takes into account, like, how long ago was the conviction? What have you done to sort of rebuild your life, or to show that you're not that, you know, that mistake, you've moved on from it and you've grown from that. So all of those things should be taken into account, and then you write that in writing, and then you can deny somebody a job, and employers can protect themselves. So that's, you know, the process. It is a bit, you know, it's definitely more than just banning the box. So we really want people to, you know, go onto our website, fairchancenyc.org, you know, check in with the city's website to make sure that, you know, we know exactly how the law should be implemented, and making sure that people aren't being discriminated against.
Great. And Hannah, what do you suggest we do to help to continue to prepare people so that when they get an opportunity, they're actually ready for it, right? And equipped, so that there'll be less opportunity for discrimination? Because, you know, sometimes we want people to be thoroughly prepared for the interviews, and you spoke about that. So you have some suggestions for us there?
Well, I believe that this is, with this act, it's something that will change the way we run the workshop, because we do need to educate our clients as to what the rights that they have in terms of the whole process, so that when they sincerely feel that they've been discriminated or discredited because of their criminal justice background, they know they have a solution, and not get further discouraged or frustrated, because a lot of times that will return them to the streets and back to what they were doing that landed them in jail in the first place.
That's a good answer. And so, Alyssa, a question for you about employers. I recall talking to employers sometimes, and they feel trepidation about laws that kind of like squeeze them and place constraints on them. They feel like, you're telling me who I should hire. Can you speak to that? Because I'm saying that that's not necessarily the case. The law gives you the opportunity to hire the person that you think is most suitable for the job, without necessarily evaluating the criminal history of the person. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. One, I think that, you know, I think that the Fair Chance Act is actually, you could argue that it's beneficial to employers,
Yes.
in order to protect themselves from violating Article 23A law, which already is in place. So Party City, Bed Bath & Beyond, they actually got in trouble with the New York State Attorney General's office lately, because they were saying, like, no felons can apply or something like just blatantly illegal. And if the Fair Chance Act was in effect, they would know how to process and to consider conviction histories in their hiring process. And this law does, and then the second thing we want to say is that this law does not require that you hire anybody with a conviction history. All it says is give people a fair shot to, go through the process, and then if something comes up that is actually going to be an impediment or a, reasonable risk of why you want to deny them a job, then that's fine. You can deny the job in that instance, but we just want to make sure people aren't being unfairly, unnecessarily discriminated against. And as you guys were saying, oftentimes people just need a fair chance to get work, and they become the best employers, and it helps employers not immediately dismiss a whole pool of applicants because they checked yes. That could have been the best person for the job. And people are with this law, you're able to have a wider pool of applicants and really find the best person without using the criminal background as a way to sort of cloud their judgment and cloud their thinking.
Yeah, that's a great answers. One of the things that's come up as well is, so I know organizations that serve people with criminal records are considering how to now, as you said, Hannah, a little while ago, how to advise people. Because I believe there's a provision in the statute as well that says about if someone voluntarily discloses information, I think it says that the employee should try not to continue along that path.
Yeah, so
asking those questions.
So the city released their guidance recently,
Yes.
and somebody says, and I understand that it's difficult because the Fortune Society and many research organizations, the whole ethos is about being forthright and honest and acknowledging it, but saying who you are today, and so it is a little bit in conflict. But unfortunately there are so many people that don't have the benefit of being at the Fortune Society and going through those sorts of processes, and so we want to make sure that everyone is the most equipped. And so essentially, what the law says, the guidance from the city is saying, if somebody says something, be like, okay, great, and then kind of move on from it, not to ask any further questions.
Got it. And so, Hannah, do you feel now, as someone who was involved in the system yourself, who now works at the Fortune Society, but do you feel confident that this law is going in the right direction insofar as offering folks with criminal records the opportunity to secure gainful employment? Do you feel like we're on the right track?
Yes, I do. With the Fair Chance Act, I feel that it will give our clients or any other individual with a criminal justice background the opportunity to interview for this job and the focus be on their abilities and their skills and not on their criminal justice background. And many of our clients are more than qualified for the job, and they have proven to be loyal to their previous employers. Yeah. But because some individuals are just hung up on that one thing, they're denied. And it gets very frustrating for them. So I think that this way they can walk into an interview and concentrate on the fact that they have the skills and the abilities and speak about that as opposed to speaking about their criminal justice background.
And you spoke about your concerns. How do you feel now personally, having been in a position where you're like, I might not be able to get a job? Like, do you feel much more confident yourself?
Absolutely. Fortune gave me back that confidence because they were giving me opportunities to continue what I do, and I enjoy what I do. And so I pass that along to a lot of my clients. And I tell them, reach for the stars. You can go ahead and pursue whatever you'd like to, but you have to, remain confident and know that you can do it. Sure. And with this, like I said, I think it will give them that opportunity to do so.
What about, are there some employers that are outside the realm of the Fair Chance Act? Because I'm sure some clients and just people in the general public will say, well, does this job apply? Does this agency apply?
That's a great question. So sometimes, when we were talking about this bill, the first things people's mind goes to is like, well, you're going to have, sex offenders working at daycares and, the children and all this sort of questions. And,
Hysteria.
obviously, and the Fair Chance Act does not touch any job where state or federal laws require a criminal background check. So that's going to be anything working with children, working with people with disabilities, working with aging populations, basically anybody that is vulnerable or there's sort of this a sensitive nature to the job. This law is not going to impact that because we think that it is, it is important to make sure that for those populations that, people have a full picture. You don't want to necessarily create, unreasonable risk in those situations. So the Fair Chance Act, there are several jobs that are exempt from it, and those are the ones that would be.
Got it. Thank you. So we have just a couple of minutes left. Any parting words about the Fair Chance Act that you think would be valuable for our audience?
I feel that everyone should be more educated on the Fair Chance Act. It'll give everybody a better understanding of their rights as an employer and as an individual applying for employment.
Yes.
And the better we understand, we can move forward.
Thank you. And Alyssa, some parting words?
I definitely echo those sentiments. Unfortunately, you can write the best civil rights legislation, but it doesn't do anything unless people know their rights and stand up and say, hey, I've been discriminated against. Yes. And so at Vocal, we are a membership-based organization. Yes. Many of our members are formerly incarcerated looking for works. So we want to, send people, if you have a record and you're looking for a job and you want to sort of share with us how it's going, what kind of questions you're being asked, any best practices, we're definitely going to lean on Fortune for how do we advise people going through the process. This is all new and it's great, but we need to, work together and figure it out together. And so we're looking forward to it, but I think that overall this is, a step in the right direction and we're excited about it.
And we concur. And the point also is that, as you know, the employers have rights too. Mm-hmm. This is not for them to say hire anybody who has a criminal record. So thank you for being on the show, Alyssa. Thank you, Hannah, for being on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Really valuable conversation. So thank you, Alyssa and Hannah, for joining us on both sides of the bars today. And thank you in TV Land for joining us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at thefortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Ronald Day as we critically look at both sides of the bars.